very happy that you invited me to this conference. First, I want to extend the uh, greetings of the President of Nigeria Movement for the Liberation of Western Sahara, uh, Professor Ibrahim Gambari, and the coordinator, Dr. Dipo Fashina. My intervention will first look at the position of African Union with respect to the Western Saharan liberation struggle. And I will just talk first on the Organization of African Unity's position on Western Sahara. I believe that for those who have read the treatise by C.D. Omar, you would have seen that position vividly depicted, because right from inception, the OAU that later in 2002 became African Union had been in support of Western Sahara and had recognized Western Sahara as an independent colony right from 1963. And all through, for a very long time, whenever the issue of Western Sahara comes up, the Organization of African Unity almost unanimously will support the Western Sahara against Morocco. Now, why is this sudden change, especially from 2002, when Organization of African Unity became African Union, and then in 2017, when Morocco started the move to come back to the African Union after about 33 years of absence? You remember that in 1984, when the Organization of African Union Unity recognized Western Sahara, Morocco withdrew its membership. So I think what really happened is not very different from what Morocco had been doing at the level of the United Nations. We were at a conference in Algiers when a lady who was working at the UN accused Moroccan envoy of trying to bribe her. And it's not very different from the approach that Morocco is now using in African Union. The simple thing is that Morocco uses the resources of Western Sahara that are taken illegally and then makes overtures to African heads of states that they can have these resources for as long as they can be able to support Morocco. To a large extent, in our movement, we are convinced that that is one strategic motivation that Morocco had been using in African Union to convince the leaders to support Morocco. And that's exactly why when Morocco decided to come back, it wasn't very difficult for many of the African leaders to support Morocco to come back to African Union. Well, for us, I think there are other strategies that we can use. But let me also quickly say that Morocco had realized that it is getting a lot of opposition, mainly from the Southern African trade unions and the Western African trade unions. And that is exactly one reason why Morocco decided to now request for membership of the Economic Community of West African States. But there is also another economic reason behind it, because Morocco wants to now serve as the gateway for products from Europe and America to be getting into West Africa and then stifling the economic developmental efforts of the countries in that region. There are too many things against Morocco, but because of this motivation that Morocco is using the resources of Western Sahara, I think the opposition is now gradually waning. But for us as trade unionists, we are still struggling, we are still engaging to make sure that Morocco is not accepted in ECOWAS. Having said that, I would also want to agree with the last speaker, the last but one speaker, that this the legislators in the country, in each country, have a very serious role to play. In Nigeria, for instance, we were able to mobilize at the level of our movement to engage the National Assembly members, and we were able to get them to put an opposition to Morocco being accepted in ECOWAS with the support of Nigeria. And to a large extent, that is what had stalled the acceptance of Morocco in ECOWAS. Now, carrying this further, I think there is a need for us to also mobilize in such a way that trade unions in other regions of Africa would be doing the same thing. I know that in South Africa, something like that is going on, and also in North Africa. But I think it's important that we duplicate this in other regions in Africa. Reason being that if our heads of states were able to bow down to Morocco's pressure, if they come back home and meet us, and we really pose an opposition to whatever they are doing, knowing that they will have to come back to us for votes, they will have no option than to do our bidding. So on the basis of that, at one of the meetings of the Organization for African Trade Unions Unity, in Mali, we were able to engage the leadership. And then we were thinking that if we can mobilize all the trade unions in Africa and then organize a conference to coincide with one of the summits of the African Union, we will then be able to use that opportunity to engage African leaders and make them understand our position as far as the liberation of Western Sahara is concerned. So for us, I think that will serve the purpose of sending the message home to the African leaders that whatever Morocco is doing to mobilize them, if they go back home, they are going to face opposition from the trade union movement. And we have seen that in Nigeria, it has worked for us severally. There was a time we organized a protest march to the Moroccan embassy, and we were also able to move to the UN to submit letters. That aroused the consciousness of Nigerians on what is happening in Western Sahara. Secondly, there was a time when the richest man in Africa, Dangote, was about to finalize a deal with Morocco for export of phosphate to Nigeria to enable him sustain his cement industry. But we were able to get one of us who has now been appointed as the lawyer of Western Sahara in Africa, Barrister Femi Falana, to write to Dangote and draw his attention to what is happening. To some extent, that also played a role. So for us, I think the African leaders needed their attention to be drawn to the fact that if they accept overtures from Morocco, they will come back home and meet their people, and definitely that will convince them to forget about what Morocco has been doing to them. Look at, for instance, in Nigeria, just before Morocco became readmitted in African Union, the leader, that is King Mohammed VI, visited our head of state and then also invited our head of state. We believe that many of the people surrounding the head of state were mobilized to continue supporting the cause of Morocco. But like I said, if you are able to mobilize the people in the country and the leader realizes that he's not going to have the votes if he doesn't do what is right as far as Western Morocco is concerned, that will force the leader to do what is right. I think I can stop here and allow for questions. Thank you very much.